FBI Director James Comey is coming out with a memoir, and he has already done a couple interviews in order to promote it. Now, those interviews haven't aired, but ABC has put out a few teasers, a few snippets, and some people have gotten an early have been given the early copy of the book. So we know some of what Comey wrote about. And even though it's a memoir, multiple chapters consist of some of his viewpoints on Trump. So let's go to the first video. Here is Comey talking about his experience briefing Donald Trump on Russian meddling.
President-elect Trump's first question was to confirm that it had no impact on the election. And then the conversation, to my surprise, moved into a PR conversation about how the Trump team would position this and what they could say about this. They actually started talking about drafting a press release.
You also said you were struck by what they didn't ask.
Very much. No one, to my recollection, asked, so what's coming next from the Russians? How might we stop it? What's the future look like? It was all, what can we say about what they did and how it affects the election that we just had?
That interaction doesn't really surprise me much. Of course, Trump is much more worried about his perception among Americans. He's more worried about his image, his ego. And so, yeah, he doesn't care about Russian meddling. He's just worried about people perceiving him as someone who got elected in an illegitimate way. And so the PR thing might have been confusing for Comey, but it's not confusing looking at Trump and how he's been behaving so far.
But remember, that was right in the beginning of his administration. So the Comeys of the world did not yet realize how unstable the president is, how egotistical he is, and how he doesn't care about anything that isn't about him.
But the election took forever. It started in mid-2015. The nonsense coming from Trump started then. And it was very clear that he's this crazy, maniacal egomaniac. So look, again, Comey might have just been naive about it, but I feel like Trump showed the world who he really is as soon as he started campaigning.
But a lot of people in the establishment are naive. They think, no, the president will mature him. Once he gets, you remember they used to talk about that? Pivot. Yeah, once he gets into office, he'll understand the gravity of the situation. And what we kept saying on the show is, no, he's not constitutionally capable of maturing or making intelligent decisions and putting the office above his own interests. But that's the way that people think there. And so Comey, I'm sure, naively assumed, as I would be surprised if most of Washington didn't assume, no, but he's not gonna brazenly tell the head of the FBI, I don't care about the Russian meddling. All I care about is you protecting me and swearing loyalty oath to me rather than the Constitution, because that was so outside of the norm of what presidents do that he couldn't help but be shocked by it.
I'm also amused that he asked, the FBI director about writing a press release. Like, that's not what the FBI does. It's just incredible. But anyway,
he thought that he was a press secretary. He's like, what part of what FBI stands for? What press is there? No, you know what's crazy is I think a lot of us for a minute fell when he had that meeting with Obama. He said, we had a good meeting. It was supposed to be a half an hour. It was an hour and a half. I listened to him, this and that. There was a moment there where I myself, I was like, wait a minute. All that stuff was campaign talk. Maybe he's going to change. And I remember specifically, I have a 9-year-old and a 7-year-old at the time a year ago. So they were 6 and 8 at the time. They were worried, they were upset, and I tried to instill in them the idea that in America, we have an election. Other countries, they have revolutions. I go, we have a peaceful transfer of power. I go, we have to then respect the president, give him a chance. Let's give him a chance, guys. We got to be there. That same weekend, he starts tweeting about Alec Baldwin's performance on SNL. I'm like, this guy's an idiot. Yeah. So I just lost my mind right away. And it's just been downhill since.
There's still idiots in Washington particularly, and I think around the country, who do believe that Donald Trump is going to grow up someday and change. And listen, he's not. What we got is the worst we can imagine, and we've got it. But back to that clip, there's two things that struck me about it. One is, this is the very, very first conversation that he's having with Donald Trump about the Russian meddling. He's briefing him. And Donald Trump, not at that time and not since, has condemned what the Russians did to try to undermine this election because, and you're absolutely right, because he believes that acknowledging that they did anything undermines the legitimacy of his presidency.
And that's why he was so obsessed with the millions of voters who voted for Hillary over him, and that the voters that made the difference in the popular vote. He's obsessed with that and obsessed with delegitimizing that fact by arguing that undocumented immigrants voted for her because of his ego. He doesn't want to appear as someone who didn't deserve to win the presidency. Okay, so we got to move on to the other clips. In this next clip, he talks about what Trump really cared about when it came to that dossier. Take a look.
I'm about to talk to him about allegations that he was involved with prostitutes in Moscow and that the Russians taped it. I started to tell him about the allegation was that he had been involved with prostitutes in a hotel in Moscow in 2013 during a visit for the Miss Universe pageant, and that the Russians had filmed the episode. And he interrupted very defensively and started talking about it. You know, do I look like a guy who needs hookers? And I assumed he was asking that rhetorically. I didn't answer that, and then I just moved on and explained, sir, I'm not saying that we credit this, I'm not saying we believe it. We just thought it very important that you know.
Did you tell him you thought it wasn't true, or you didn't know if it was true or not?
I never said I don't believe it, because I couldn't say one way or another.
How weird was that briefing?
Really weird. It was almost an out-of-body experience for me. I was floating above myself, looking down, saying, you're sitting here briefing the incoming president of the United States about prostitutes in Moscow.
So he also, Comey, in other parts of this interview, had mentioned that Trump was obsessed with proving that it was a lie, that whole prostitutes urinating on one another thing was a complete lie, because there was a 1% chance that Melania would believe it. And this quote from Comey I thought was great. He said, in what kind of marriage, to what kind of man does a spouse conclude there is only a 99% chance her husband didn't do that? And it's so true. I mean, if someone came to me and accused my husband of that, I'd be like, yeah, right. I wouldn't believe it. 100% chance, I'm not gonna believe it. Anyway.
So no, there's a lot of quotes in Comey's book that I actually thought he didn't need to go there.
He did.
Okay, all right, so we disagree a little bit on that, because I want him to maintain his credibility. So when he makes fun of Donald Trump's hands and his appearance, it's a little funny, it's a little snarky, but at the same time, I feel like it kind of takes away from him a little bit. On the other hand, that line that Anna just read is awesome, right? Yeah. What kind of a marriage and what kind of a man is that only a 99% chance that you didn't go and have two hookers pee on each other because you didn't like the man who slept in that bed earlier? Like, what an insane thing that's on the board. That's on the board.
Can I say, what an insane thing that we are talking about this now, the United States of America and the President of the United States? I mean, just think about it. It's unbelievable.
It's almost like it's Silvio Berlusconi and we're in Italy.
It is.
There was another quote was on there, says, there's no way I would let people pee on each other around me. This is Trump, in part because he is a self-professed germaphobe. No way. That's hilarious. Like, that's the proof. I'm a germaphobe.
He just seemed obsessed with that particular part of the dossier. That was the part that really stood out to him the most, and he wouldn't let it go. In fact, he was pushing for the FBI to specifically investigate that, to disprove it. And Comey told him, if you want us to do it, I will do it, but it's a bad idea because it's gonna draw more attention to it. You want this to go away. You don't want the press to continue talking about the urination thing.
Right. You know, I just got to throw this out there, but I must admit, I've got a problem with this whole book because I'm not a huge fan of James Comey's. I mean, I really do think Comey went way over the line in the Clinton campaign during that campaign, particularly on that second time around, October 28. I mean, there are those who believe that he cost her the election. I don't go that far, but he was no friend of democracy, I think, at the time. So now, but when it comes down to Trump versus Comey, there's no doubt which one is more credible, which one is a straight arrow. It's James Comey.
Well, listen, first of all, I will go that far. There's a lot of reasons why Hillary lost, but that last minute, I remember reading it and going, oh no, this is not, he basically took anybody who was on the fence and threw him at Trump. So I think he did. That's what's, again, the irony of all this. He won the election for the guy, and now the guy is attacking him. But what's crazy is this world that you guys were talking about, the world that we live in right now. Look, I don't know if I believe in the urinating and all that stuff. But the fact that there is a possibility that this guy, because if it were if this had been said about Obama, you would be, or let's take a Republican guy, even George W. Bush. If this had come out about George W. Bush that he was with prostitutes or peeing on each other, we'd all laugh it up. Like, this is crazy.
Yeah.
We live in a world right now where we have to actually think that this is a possibility. We live in a world where in Hawaii, when they get alarms that there's bombs coming from North Korea, people really think the war is happening because this guy's taken us that far.
You know what? For the record, I believe every word of it. Yeah. Donald Trump, I believe every word of it. He's a sick man.
Okay, so last thing about this is that Comey at one point in talking about what you guys just mentioned, the election and whether it was the right thing to do to have that 11 days before the election put out that statement saying that he's reopening the investigation about Hillary Clinton, admitted that he thought Hillary Clinton was going to win and he didn't want her presidency to be considered illegitimate if he didn't announce that he had reopened that investigation when he had behind the scenes. Yeah. But you know what? That actually, so fair is fair, guys. So that to me, and when they asked him, okay, would you have publicly announced that if you thought Donald Trump was leading in the polls? And he said, I don't know. And what's fair is that does call into question Comey's credibility. And so I guess he's being honest about that. But then I do go, wait a minute. It sounds like you did want one person to win and not the other.
No, I mean,
even though he did the opposite. You know, he cost Hillary Clinton in a lot of ways.
It's funny because my perspective is very different. I think Comey is the type of guy, I think he's made a ton of mistakes, but I think he's the type of guy who's obsessed with doing the right thing or doing what he perceives to be the right thing. And in being so obsessed, he kind of like fumbles and makes bad decisions. And so reopening the investigation that close to the election, you know, I don't know whether or not I think it's a good or bad idea. I mean, I think that she needed to be investigated. I wish that it would have been earlier. I wish he would have done the thorough investigation when he did the initial investigation. So there's no question about that. But I also think that he is not someone who is looking to his own political bias in order to influence the outcome of anything. I think he tried to do the right thing and then ended up making what he now perceives as a mistake.
You just watched the video by the Young Turks, the home of the revolution. If you'd like to get the full show, come join us and become a member. tytnetwork.com/join.